My name is Gerald Mackay, and I was 58 years old the December. My daughter told me Christmas dinner was already sorted. One message, that was all it took. I was out behind the workshop, splitting the last of the birch I'd stacked before the ground froze, and my phone buzzed in my coat pocket. My daughter's name on the screen. I still remember feeling something lift in my chest when I saw it, the way it always did. Even then, I read the message twice, then a third time, the way you do when the words don't quite fit together, the way they should. Hey Dad, just wanted to let you know, we're keeping Christmas pretty low-key this year. Dominic's parents are coming in from Burlington, and it's going to be a full house. We'll connect in the new year for sure. Hope you have a lovely holiday. A lovely holiday. I set the phone on the woodpile. The birch log I'd been splitting sat there half done, and I looked at it a while without really seeing it. A lovely holiday. Like she was signing off a work email, like I was a coworker she'd see at the next staff meeting. I typed back okay, then deleted it and typed of course, then deleted that and typed understood and sent it. Nothing came back. I want you to know who I was to my daughter before any of this. I want you to understand what that message meant in the full weight of it. I was 41 when my wife passed. Cancer, second diagnosis, fast and merciless. My daughter was 16. My son Wesley was 12. One afternoon she was tired. 8 weeks later I was driving home from the hospital, alone on the 115, the truck heater barely working, trying to figure out how I was going to walk in the door and say the words I had to say to two kids who still thought the worst things in the world were a bad mark on a test and missing the school bus. I ran a renovation company out of Lakefield. Small operation, 3 guys, sometimes 4 in the busy season. After the funeral I took on every job I could find. I drove to Peterborough in the dark, bid on jobs I barely had the crew for, worked weekends so the mortgage stayed paid, and the kids didn't have to think about it. I missed exactly one of my daughter's swim meets in 3 years. One. It was because a client's kitchen ceiling had come down, and I was the only one who could fix it before they lost the contents of the whole unit. I called her from the job site. I told her she'd swum faster than I'd ever seen her. I guessed right. There was a winter when the work dried up badly. January and February, nothing booked past mid-month. My daughter wanted to apply to the kinesiology program at Queen's. The application fee, the campus visit, the deposit, it added up faster than I expected. I had my wife's jewelry in a box in the closet. A few pieces, nothing grand. The ring, 2 pendants, a bracelet her mother had given her. I sold the pendants to a shop in Peterborough, covered everything. My daughter never asked how I managed it. I never told her. You don't put that weight on a kid who's trying to be hopeful about the future. I wasn't a perfect father. I was quieter after my wife died than I should have been. There were evenings I sat at the kitchen table, long after supper was cold, and didn't talk because I didn't know how to talk about the thing sitting in the middle of the room. I worked too much, but I was there. I was always there. So when I stood in the snow behind the workshop reading that my daughter's Christmas was already full, it wasn't a dinner invitation I was losing. It was 17 years of showing up, compressed into a message that wished me a lovely holiday. Let me tell you when it started, because it didn't happen all at once. It never does. My daughter brought her husband home 4 years ago. He was polished, confident, the kind of man who fills a room by knowing exactly how much space to take up. He was a marketing director for a consulting firm in Toronto, something to do with brand management. He talked about positioning and narrative alignment, and I nodded along and pretended those were normal things to say over dinner at a kitchen table in Lakefield. He called me Gerald right away, which was fine, but there was something underneath it. The way he looked at the workshop, the house, the old Silverado in the driveway, not rude, just appraising, the way a property assessor looks at things, not the way a person does. The first Christmas after they were engaged, I offered to host like I always had. My daughter said they were thinking of doing something at their condo in Toronto. No pressure, just exploring options. That was the phrase. Exploring options. I said of course, whatever worked best. I drove down to Toronto that Christmas and sat at their kitchen island while my son-in-law talked about a campaign his firm had just landed. The following year, I got the address by text on December 23rd. His parents were there. I was seated across the table from them and watched him watch the room like he was monitoring a presentation. Then there was my granddaughter Nora's 5th birthday. I found out about it on social media. My daughter had posted photos. They were in Burlington at a party venue. She said it had come together last minute, mostly her husband's side. She hadn't thought I'd want to drive that far. It was 2 hours. I'd driven 2 hours to unclog a drain in Bancroft in February once. The Sunday calls thinned, every other week. Then just when something came up. The Christmas cards they sent were addressed in my son-in-law's handwriting. Very formal, Gerald McKay on the envelope, as if I might not know who I was. Each time I told myself the same thing. Keep the peace. Don't become a burden. A father who makes every disappointment into a conversation is an exhausting father. And I would not be exhausting. I would say sounds good and no worries at all, and have a wonderful time. I said those things so many times they stopped meaning anything. What I called keeping the peace, my son-in-law called progress. By that December, there wasn't much of me left in her life to clear away. Just one seat at one table, and now that was gone too. There was one thing though, Nora. 7 years old, slight and serious, and always asking why things worked the way they did. She'd come to the workshop with my daughter sometimes when she was small, and I'd let her sit on the old stool and hand me clamps. She called sawdust wood flour and asked me once if I could bake something with it. When she was 6, I promised her we'd build something together, a cedar strip canoe, small enough for a pond, big enough for two. I'd sketched the plans on an old Tim Hortons bag one afternoon while she watched, and she'd held on to that bag like it was a treasure map. "You promise, Grandpa?" "I promise." She kept the bag in the drawer beside her bed. The visits to the workshop had been shrinking for a year. Always a reason. Nora had activities. Nora had a cold. It was a long drive. I drove to the end of the laneway once with the cedar already in the truck bed, ready to start, and got a text when I was 20 minutes away. "Bad timing, Dad, sorry." I drove home and unloaded the wood alone. I wasn't foolish. I could see what was happening. But you tell yourself maybe you're imagining it. Maybe this is just what families look like when kids grow up and marry into other families. You negotiate with yourself right up until the moment you can't. And that Christmas message was the moment I couldn't. 2 days after it came, a letter arrived. Thick envelope, real paper, my name written by hand in the careful way older people write. Return address, Lakefield Rotary Club. I read it standing at the mailbox with the cold coming up through my boots. I'll tell you what it said in a moment, not quite yet. I want you to hear it the way the town heard it later, when it mattered. What I'll say now is this. There were things about my life my daughter had never asked about. Not because she didn't care, but because I'd never made them easy to see. When you do things quietly for long enough, they become invisible. That's partly the point and partly the problem. I folded the letter back into the envelope, went inside, put the kettle on, set the letter on the counter beside the fruit bowl. I didn't call my daughter to tell her about it. There was no room at her table for me. There was certainly no room for this. But standing at the counter with my hands wrapped around a mug of tea that was too hot to drink, something in my chest shifted. Not quite anger, something under it, steated ear. For years I'd been measuring my worth by whether my daughter still included me. That letter reminded me there were people in this town who had never once made me feel like I was extra. That evening I called my son. Wesley teaches shop at a high school in Calgary. He took the job there 6 years ago when his wife got a position at Foothills Medical Center, and they built a life out west. He calls every Sunday without fail. He picked up on the second ring. I kept my voice level when I told him about the Christmas message. I'm good at that. Level voice, flat water. It's both a skill and a flaw depending on the day. He was quiet for a few seconds. Then he said something that hit me harder than I expected. "Dad, book a flight. Come here for Christmas. Come here as if this is home because it is." "It's Christmas," I said. "You've got your own family." "You are my family, you stubborn man. Book the flight." So I did, right there at the kitchen table with my son on speaker and my tea going cold, a red eye out of Pearson on the 23rd into Calgary by morning. 3,000 kilometers of prairie below me, while my daughter's house filled up with her husband's parents, and whatever version of the holiday he'd been curating. For the first time in years, I chose somewhere I was wanted. I closed the laptop. My son said he'd have coffee on. I felt lighter than I had in months. I also felt something else, small and unsettled, like I'd left the stove on. That letter on the counter, I hadn't given it a proper answer. The next morning, I took it out and read it again. The Rotary Club wanted to give me an award. Community service, 15 years of contributions. I nearly laughed at the word. It sounded too formal for what it actually was. Here's what it actually was. After my wife died, I started doing volunteer rainos for Habitat for Humanity. 1 season, which became 3, which became 15 years of weekends in places that needed the help. Then I started noticing kids coming out of high school with no clear path and no money but good hands. And I remembered being that kid before someone pointed me toward a trade. I started a small bursary fund. Nothing grand, just a few $1,000s a year at first, pulling from whatever I could set aside. I called it the Mackay Trade Fund, though I tried to keep even that quiet. Over the years, between the fund and some connections I'd made with the local college, we'd helped put close to 30 young people into apprenticeships. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters, kids who might have drifted otherwise. I did it because my wife would have wanted it, because someone had helped me when I was 22 and didn't know what I was doing. I never did it to be seen. I called the Rotary Club president to decline. I had a flight, I said. I'd be in the air. She wasn't having it. Gerald, she said, the dinner is the 22nd, your flight is the 23rd. You have no excuse and I've run out of patience for your modesty. The whole town wants to say thank you. Don't take that from them. I sat with the phone against my ear. 30 young people with trades, 15 years of weekends, things I'd never mentioned at a single family dinner, because they'd never felt like the right dinner topic. Let me think about it, I said. Think fast, she said, it's in 4 days. I hung up, and a strange thought settled over me. My daughter didn't know who I was. Not really. Not the whole of it. I've since pieced together what was happening at her house those same days. She told me most of it later, and I'll tell it the way she told me. She'd sent that Christmas message from the couch, her phone in one hand, my son-in-law reading over her shoulder. She'd written something else first. Something with an apology in it, something that sounded like her. He'd reached over gently, the way he did everything, gentle and certain, and said, you don't need to over-explain, it just invites a negotiation. He'd taken the phone, deleted what she'd written, typed the version I received. Hope you have a lovely holiday. She hesitated. This was her father, the man who'd driven to every swim meet in the dark in winter. He'll make it into a whole thing, my son-in-law said. You know how he gets. She sent his words as her own, and then she couldn't sleep. She told me later that she lay awake that night, feeling like she'd left something running that she couldn't switch off. She almost called me, got as far as my name on the screen. Then he stirred beside her, and she set the phone face down. It's the right move for everyone, he said, half asleep, you'll see. My daughter didn't write those words, but she'd sent them, and she'd have to live with that. What neither of them knew was that in 4 days, the whole town was going to find out exactly who they'd left standing outside in the cold. I tried once more, I want that on the record. Before the flight, before any of it, I called my daughter and asked if she'd meet me for coffee, just us, an hour. I drove to the Tim Hortons near the highway, the one we used to stop at on the way back from her swim meets when she was 15, and the world still felt manageable. She didn't answer. He did. Gerald, warm voice, reasonable voice. She's just stepped out, what can I do for you? I called my daughter, I said. She's swamped, honestly. The holidays are a lot, you understand. She's my daughter, I said. And she's my wife. We're a team. A pause. Let's not make things harder than they need to be for everyone. There it was. For everyone. He wielded the idea of family like something he'd taken from me and repackaged with a nicer label. All right, I said. You take care of yourselves. I hung up before he could be gracious about it. I stood at the kitchen table, looking at the boarding pass I'd printed off, thinking about my daughter somewhere in that condo, not taking back the phone. I would give them space, an entire prairie's worth of it. What I didn't know yet was that my granddaughter had been listening from the hallway. Nora called me 2 days before I left. She used the old iPad her parents kept in the study and figured out how to reach me. Her face filled the screen, too close, the way kids always hold a camera. Grandpa, are you coming for Christmas? I chose my words carefully. You don't put grown-up weight on a child's foundation. Not this year, sweetheart. I'm going to visit Uncle Wesley, way out in Calgary. It's a real adventure. Her face fell in that quick, total way only kids can manage. But the canoe, you said this winter we'd start the plans. The canoe's still happening, I promise. You pinky promised, she said. And I keep those, I said. Every single one. She looked down, then back up, lowered her voice like she was passing a secret. Grandpa, why doesn't Mom want you to come? My chest went tight. What makes you ask that, sweetheart? I heard them. In the kitchen, she dropped her voice further. Dad said you make things awkward, and Mom was crying a little. I don't want things to be awkward. Make things awkward. 7 years old carrying that. None of that is your job to worry about, I said, keeping my voice like still water. I love you. Your mom loves you. That's the whole true thing. Are you sad? Right now, talking to you, not even a little. She almost smiled. Then I heard something shift in the background, a door, footsteps. Nora, his voice from somewhere nearby. Who are you talking to? The screen went dark. Call ended. I sat there staring at my own face in the black screen, heart going hard, and I made a decision that had nothing to do with the dinner table. The night before my flight, I packed a small bag, 2 sweaters, the good jacket, and in the inside pocket, carefully folded, the Tim Hortons bag with the canoe plan sketched on it. I travel light, always have. My phone rang, the Rotary Club president. You're coming tonight, she said. Not a question. I fly tomorrow morning. The dinner is tonight. You have time, Gerald Mackay. I have been waiting 15 years to do this, and I am not being polite about it anymore. Wear something decent and get in the truck. I looked at the jacket hanging on the door. I hadn't worn it since my son's wedding. Who's going to be there? I asked. Everyone, she said, half the county. People you helped 15 years ago, who have never had the chance to look you in the eye and say thank you properly. I almost said no. I had my reasons stacked up like clean lumber. All of them true, all of them small. Then I thought of Nora, of You Make Things Awkward, of a little girl keeping a Tim Hortons bag in the drawer beside her bed. I thought about what it teaches a child when a good man keeps making himself invisible. All right, I said, I'll be there. Wear the jacket. The community hall in town was full when I walked in. Round tables, good chairs they'd borrowed from the church next door, string lights someone had threaded through the rafters, coffee and butter tarts on a side table. Maybe 150 people, maybe more, and I knew a good third of them by name. She met me at the door in a blue blazer and steered me to a seat near the front like she thought I might bolt. She wasn't wrong. Then she went to the podium and started talking about me. She talked about the weekends on build sites, about the bursary fund. A man I didn't recognize stood up in the second row and said his son was a licensed electrician because of the Macatrade fund. Then a woman near the back stood up and said her nephew runs his own drywall operation now, looked straight at me and started clapping. One by one, they stood. I sat there with my hands flat on my knees, ears burning, wishing I was anywhere else. I build things so I don't have to stand in front of rooms. But I looked at those faces and something in me loosened. These people had never once made me feel like extra, not one of them. When she called me to the front, the whole room rose, 150 people on their feet, clapping for a retired carpenter from Lakefield in a wedding jacket with dust on the shoulders. That's when I saw him. Off to the side, near the coffee table, a man in a very good suit, watching me with an expression I can only describe as recalibrating. I recognized him from a photo I'd seen once on my son-in-law's desk at the condo. Framed. Prominent position. He was the head of a national retail brand that my son-in-law's firm had managed for 3 years, the biggest account on their roster. He found me afterward while people were still shaking my hand. Gerald Mackay, he said, putting out his hand. That was something. I've been coming to this town for years and I had no idea. We talked easily, the way people do when both of them understand what it means to build something real. Then he mentioned he had a property near the lake, and I mentioned my daughter and her husband. Dominic, I said. Something shifted in his face, not dramatic, small. The expression of a man fitting 2 pieces together that he hadn't known belonged to the same puzzle. Dominic's been managing our account for 3 years, he said slowly. He's never once mentioned you. A pause. Gerald, if my father-in-law were the man this whole room just stood up for, I'd have led with it at our very first meeting. I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. That's interesting, he said, half to himself. That's actually quite interesting. Then he smiled, shook my hand again. Real honor to meet you. Enjoy your Christmas in Calgary. I stood there holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone cold, turning it in my hands. For 4 years, my son-in-law had worked to keep me outside the frame. He'd managed how he was perceived so carefully, so patiently. It had never occurred to him that the two worlds he lived in might ever overlap. The world he'd built me out of, and the world he was climbing. They'd just touched in a community hall in Lakefield over bad coffee and butter tarts, with 150 witnesses. I didn't plan it. I couldn't have. But I felt the ground shift under a man who wasn't even in the room. The next morning, before I drove to the airport, I wrote my daughter one message. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee going cold, and I wrote the plainest thing I knew how to write. Ingrid, I love you. I'm not going to beg to be included where I'm not wanted. I'm going to spend Christmas with Wesley, and I'm going to have a good time. Give Nora a hug for me. Tell her the canoe is still on. Merry Christmas, sweetheart, Dad. I read it twice. I didn't mention the award. It wasn't a weapon, and I wouldn't treat it like one. If she was ever going to understand who her father was, it wouldn't be because I told her to be impressed. I sent it, picked up my bag, locked the house. My wife's rocking chair sat in the workshop, one arm still slightly loose. I'd get to it when I got back. I drove to Pearson in the dark, parked long-term, checked one bag, walked to the gate with a paperback I wouldn't read. At the gate, I did something I almost never do. I turned my phone completely off. Not silent, off, dark screen. I wanted the quiet. When I turned it back on somewhere over Manitoba, everything had already changed. Here's what happened at home. My daughter told me all of it later, and I'll tell it the way she told me. She woke up Christmas Eve morning to a phone that wouldn't stop. Not calls yet. Messages. Photos from the community hall had gone up on the town's Facebook page overnight. Someone had posted the whole thing. The speech, the people standing, my name on the screen behind the podium, big enough to read from the back row, and underneath it, the comments. Ingrid, your dad is a legend. You must be so proud. The Mackay Trade Fund put my nephew into his apprenticeship. Your father is the reason he has a career. Did you know your dad spent 15 years volunteering weekends? That man is something else. She scrolled and scrolled, her own phone telling her who her father was, in a voice the whole town seemed to know, and she didn't. The bursary fund, the build sites, 30 young people with trades, 15 years of weekends she'd never asked about. She'd sent a man with that history a message wishing him a lovely holiday, and she'd sent it in words her husband wrote. She told me she sat on the edge of the bathtub and couldn't breathe properly. Nora wandered in, saw the screen over her shoulder, and said, "That's Grandpa." Why is everyone talking about Grandpa? She called me. My phone was off over the prairies. She called again, still off. The one morning she needed to reach her father, he was unreachable. Somewhere over Saskatchewan, finally at peace, her phone kept filling with the town's admiration, and mine was dark. My son-in-law's Christmas came apart before the turkey was carved. The client called him that morning. I know the shape of that conversation, because the man told me himself months later, without apology but without pretense either. He'd seen the community page. He'd watched the video of the speech someone had posted. He'd spent the morning sitting with something he couldn't quite put down. "Dominic," he said, "I was at an event in Lakefield last night. Watched the whole town give your father-in-law a standing ovation." Silence. Roland, Gerald, sorry, rebuilt houses on his own time for 15 years. Put 30 kids into trades. Never mentioned it to anyone. A pause. "You've worked for me 3 years. You've never mentioned the man once. I'm trying to understand why." My son-in-law is good with words, he tried. "But there are things a smooth voice can't sand down." "You spend every day telling me how to be seen clearly," the client said, "and you hit a man like that because he didn't fit the picture you wanted people to see. That tells me something about your judgment that I can't unknow, Dominic. I can't unknow that." He didn't end things on the phone. Too careful for that. But something had shifted, and both men felt it settle between them. "I didn't do this. I want to be clear, I never called anyone. I never posted anything. I never said a single word against my son-in-law to a living soul. All I did was stand up in a room full of people who wanted to say thank you, and for once in my life, I let myself be seen." My son-in-law had spent 4 years managing the frame. He'd kept me outside it carefully, patiently, one politely worded message at a time. It had never once crossed his mind that the frame might widen on its own. It did, and everything he'd been so careful to hide came spilling into the light. Somewhere over Alberta, the plane offered Wi-Fi for a fee. I paid it out of habit to check the weather in Calgary. I turned the phone on. It found a signal, and then it started. Buzz, buzz, buzz. The notifications came stacking on top of each other faster than I could read them. Miss call, miss call, miss call. I watched the number climb on the screen. My daughter, my daughter, my daughter. 19 missed calls from the daughter who 4 days ago had wished me a lovely holiday. 19. I sat very still in my seat, the dark prairies somewhere below me, and I stared at that number. The man beside me was asleep. A kid 2 rows back was watching something on a tablet, and I held a whole life in my hand in the shape of 19 red digits. There was a text beneath them, one line. Dad, please call me back when you can. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know. I didn't know. I could have felt triumphant. I want to be honest with you, because you've come this far. Some small, tired corner of me did feel it for a second. The part that had been left off guest lists and wished lovely holidays. That part felt it. But it passed fast. Because underneath that number was still my daughter. The girl I used to pick up from swim practice at 10 at night. Still damp, wrapped in a towel. She was somewhere down there hurting. I took a slow breath, set the phone on my knee. 19 calls. I stared at that number a long, long time over the prairies, and I decided how I was going to answer it. I couldn't call from the plane, but the moment we taxied to the gate in Calgary, before I even stood up from my seat, I called her back. She answered before the first ring finished. Dad. Her voice broke on the word. I'm here, I said. I'm listening. And it all came out. The photos, the comments, the whole town telling her who her father was through a community Facebook page. The bursary fund, the build sites, 30 kids with trades, 15 years of weekends she'd never thought to ask about. Why didn't you tell me? She was crying now. Dad, why didn't you ever say? 'Cause it was never yours to be impressed by, I said. I didn't do it for that. She was quiet a moment. Then, the message, the Christmas one. He typed it. He took my phone and he typed it. I let him. I've been letting him do so many things, and I kept telling myself it was just his way. I didn't see it until I saw the whole town standing up for you, and I thought, that's my dad. And I've been so small. I let her sit in it, not to punish her. Some things need to be felt all the way through before they take. Ingrid, I finally said, I don't need an apology for a Christmas dinner. I need to know you'll think for yourself from now on. That's the only thing I need. I know, she said. I already asked him to leave. I was standing in the jet bridge in Calgary, other passengers filing past me, and I closed my eyes. There's one thing I need to ask you, I said, and your answer is what decides how we move forward. Anything, Dad, whatever it is. Nora, I said, and my voice nearly went. I want to be her grandfather without a permission slip, without visits that get cancelled for reasons that aren't real. I want to keep my promises to that little girl. That's the condition. Yes, she said, instantly. Certain, of course. God, yes. Dad, he's gone. I asked him to leave last night after I saw the photos and everything just clicked. I sat there looking at Nora and I thought, I'm teaching her that this is what family looks like, and I couldn't. I couldn't keep teaching her that. I hadn't expected that. I stood a little straighter in that terminal. People like him give control nicer names, I said. I know that now. A pause. I'm so sorry, Dad, for all of it. I know you are, and I did. I could hear it real and raw the way you can only hear the truth. The table was never the point, I told her. You were. You always were. She cried harder at that. But it was a different kind of crying. The kind that lets something out instead of holding it in. And for the first time in years, my daughter sounded like herself. Like the girl I'd raised before someone had quietly handed her a smaller and smaller version of herself, and called it growing up. There's someone who wants to talk to you, she said. I heard the phone move, small hands, fast breathing. Grandpa? Hey, sweetheart. Are you in Calgary? For real? Just landed. It's cold and the mountains are right there on the horizon. You'd lose your mind. She laughed, clear and unguarded, and something that had been clenched in my chest for 4 years finally let go. Then her voice went serious, the way it did when something truly mattered. Grandpa, the canoe, is it still happening? You and me, I said, Cedar Strip. Plans are in my jacket pocket right this second. I carried them the whole flight. You brought the plans? Never go anywhere without them. A pause, then quiet. Grandpa, I still have the bag, the Tim Hortons bag. I kept it in my drawer the whole time. 7 years old. kept a paper bag through every cancelled visit, every quiet excuse, waiting for a summer somebody had promised and kept not coming. I know you did, sweetheart, I said. And this summer, we're going to need a lot more bags to sketch on. Grandpa? Yeah? Her voice dropped. I never dumped the sawdust either. From the last time in your workshop, I put it in a jar on my bookshelf. I was saving it. I didn't have words for a moment, so I just said, I'll see you very soon, sweetheart, I promise. Pinky promise? The highest order, I said. The call ended. I stood in the Calgary airport with a folded paper bag in my jacket pocket and my eyes stinging and 3,000 kilometers between me and everything I loved. Then I heard my name from across the arrivals hall. My son, taller than I remembered, grinning like a teenager, came across the floor and wrapped me in a hug that lifted me half off my feet right there in front of everyone. He held on. You came, he said into my shoulder. You told me to. First time you ever actually listened to me. We drove out through Calgary, the Rockies just barely visible on the edge of the horizon. Him, talking the whole way about his students, his shop class. A rebuilt engine some kid had finished that week that everyone said couldn't be done. His wife had the lights on when we got to the house, the smell of something good in the oven. The dinner that night was not grand. Roast chicken because the turkey had been the wrong size for 2 people, plus a video call from Ontario. His wife made butter tarts from scratch. We ate at the small table by the kitchen window with snow coming down outside, and my daughter and Nora propped up on a tablet across from us. Nora announcing to the table that her grandpa was carrying her canoe plans in his jacket pocket like emergency documents. My son raised his glass. To Dad, he said, who finally figured out he's allowed to want things. I couldn't speak, so I just raised mine and nodded. Later, doing dishes, he bumped my shoulder with his. You know what your problem was, Dad? He said. You kept driving to the wrong tables and wondering why you were always hungry. I laughed because it was true, and because if I didn't laugh, I'd have wept into the dishwater. For the first time since my wife died, a holiday didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to be inside of. Back home, my son-in-law's exit wasn't loud. Men who've built everything on managing appearances don't fail dramatically. They just stop being trusted, and then they slip. The client didn't renew the contract in January. Quietly, professionally, a short email about a change in direction. But word moves in those circles the way water finds a crack. A brand consultant who kept his father-in-law off the guest list because he wasn't polished enough. And that father-in-law turned out to be the man a whole town stood up for. It was a bad story for someone whose whole business was built on good ones. I didn't celebrate it. I want you to believe that. I took no calls, sent no messages. I was in Calgary learning to eat a meal without keeping track of how much space I was taking up. The truth is he did it to himself, every bit of it. I just stopped pretending the corner he'd built for me was where I belonged. My daughter started talking to a counselor that winter. She told me about it on our Sunday calls, which we started keeping again. Real ones, long ones, the kind where you wander off the point and come back. She was untangling how she'd let it happen, year by careful year, the way someone had handed her a quieter and quieter version of herself until she forgot the original size. I keep thinking about how many times you just said whatever's easiest, she told me once, and I let that be easy for me. I'm sorry for that most of all. We were both keeping a peace that wasn't peace, I said. Yeah, she said. We were. We had our real Christmas in February. My daughter and Nora flew out to Calgary on a seat sale, and we crowded into my son's house, all 5 of us, and cooked all day. There was flour on the floor and a burned first batch of rolls, and Nora dropped an entire bowl of gravy with a shriek that made everyone jump, and then everyone laughed until it hurt. She looked up expecting trouble and got laughter instead, and the relief on her face was something I'll keep for the rest of my life. At dinner, my son pulled out a chair and set it at the head of the table. That one's yours, Dad. Sat down in it. Here's what I noticed. Here's the thing I want you to hold. I didn't sit because I'd been given permission. I didn't sit because I'd argued my way back in or proven I deserved it or waited to be told there was room. I sat because these people wanted me there. Wanted, not managed, not scheduled when convenient, not tolerated. There is an ocean of difference between wanted and tolerated, and I'd spent 4 years mistaking one for the other. My daughter caught my eye across the table. She didn't say anything large. She just reached over, held my hand for a moment, and let go. Nora, with a mouthful of potato, announced to the whole table that her grandpa helped build 6 houses and never told anyone for 15 years, and that was officially the coolest thing she had ever heard in her entire life. It's not a big deal, I started. Grandpa, she said, completely serious, it is a huge deal. My son raised his glass, and this time I raised mine first. Summer came, I kept my promise. Nora flew out to me for 10 days in July. We cleared a space in the workshop, spread the canoe plans on the workbench. The real ones, properly drawn now, not on a fast food bag, though the fast food bag was tacked to the wall where she could see it, and we started. She sanded until her arms ached and never once complained. She learned to read the grain. She learned that you measured twice because wood was not forgiving, and you were not a magician. She got a splinter the second day and wore it like a medal. We talked while we worked, the way you can only really talk when your hands are busy. She told me about school, about a friend who'd moved away, about missing her dad sometimes. Even now, even after everything. I told her it was all right to miss someone, and be glad things changed both at once. People are complicated, I said, even the ones who let us down. My daughter came for the last 4 days. She stood in the workshop doorway a lot. Tea, going cold in her hands, watching without interrupting. A different kind of distance, the kind that gives room instead of taking it away. On the last morning, we carried the canoe down to the pond. Nora climbed in. It floated. Of course it did. I don't build things that sink. She looked up at me from the water, sun right in her eyes, grinning wider than I'd ever seen. We did it, Grandpa. We did, sweetheart. My daughter watched from the shore. When I glanced back, she mouthed 2 words across the water. Thank you. I think she meant for not fully closing the door on her. A father's door doesn't close that easily. It's not built for it. It's been a while now, and I can tell you how things settled. I see Nora when I want. No gatekeeping, no schedule handed down from on high. She calls me on her own most weeks, mostly to show me something she made, or a bug she found in the garden, or a photo of the canoe still floating at the edge of the pond. She sends those photos every summer without being asked. My daughter and I talk every Sunday. Real conversations now, long ones. She went back to her career. She laughs more. She says what she thinks without checking over her shoulder first. I never get tired of hearing it. My son-in-law is gone from the picture. Not destroyed, not chased out. Just unable to stand in a family that finally saw clearly what he'd been doing. Last I heard, he'd moved to another city for a fresh start. I wish him no harm. I just don't have room for him at my table. And now, neither does she. Here is what changed in me. For 17 years, I confused keeping the peace with keeping the love. I thought if I never caused trouble, never asked for anything, never took up space, they'd have no reason to push me further out. I had it completely backwards. All that silence just made me easy to overlook, easy to schedule around, easy to erase. I don't do that anymore. I say what I mean plainly, without making it into a scene. I have limits now. At 58, for the first time in my adult life, I understand that limits aren't walls that keep people out. They're the shape that tells the right people they're safe to stay. The rocking chair in the workshop is finally fixed, by the way. I got to it last November. My wife would have liked how it turned out. Here's the thing I want you to take from all of this. Not because I'm wise. I learned it the slow, expensive way, and maybe you don't have to. You do not have to beg for a seat at a table where someone has already decided you don't belong. I spent years doing exactly that, shrinking. Saying sounds good and no worries and calling it being easygoing. It wasn't easygoing, it was fear wearing a better coat. The moment I stopped asking, everything shifted. Not because I planned something. Not because I schemed or waited for my moment. I just stood up straight in a room full of people who saw me for what I was, and for once, I let that be enough. The truth did the rest entirely on its own. If someone treats your presence as optional, believe them, and then go find the tables where your absence would be felt. They exist. I promise you they do. Mine was 3,000 kilometers away, and I nearly didn't go. Dignity is quiet. It doesn't need to win an argument or land a blow. Sometimes dignity is just a man who buys a plane ticket, turns off his phone, and lets himself be carried somewhere he's actually wanted. And here's the part that surprised me most. When I stopped chasing the ones who'd made it clear I was extra, the ones who'd always wanted me there moved closer. My daughter came back. Nora never left. My son had been waiting across the prairies all along with the coffee already on. You are allowed to be wanted, not managed, not tolerated, not included when it's convenient, wanted. It took me 58 years to understand there is always room at the right table. The only trick is being willing to drive away from the wrong one. Last thing. Late August evening, the light going gold over the pond. Nora and I carried the canoe down to the water one last time before she flew home. She climbed in. I gave it a gentle push. She drifted out into the middle, trailing her hand along the surface, laughing at nothing in particular. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. I almost didn't check it, but I looked. A photo from my daughter, the dining room table at her place, a chair pulled out at the head of it. 3 words underneath. Your seat, Dad. I stood on the shore, and I typed back the only true thing there was to say. On my way. And I meant it. Because this time I already knew the room was real.